My family laughed when I inherited a rundown apartment at 16. I didn't tell them what I built with it. My brother's fiancée called me poor at her engagement party in a hotel I owned. Posted to our chartreux off my chest. I want to start with my great-aunt Meredith because she is the beginning of everything and because she deserves to be in the first paragraph. Meredith was my grandmother's younger sister, the one the family described as eccentric, which is the word families use for women who make choices that prioritize themselves over everyone else's comfort. She never married. She traveled. She worked in hotel management for 30 years, starting as a front desk clerk in 1971 and ending as the regional director of operations for a mid-size hospitality group before she retired. She bought a small apartment in Portland with her own money in 1988, and she paid it off over 15 years, and she left it to me when she died because, she wrote in the letter the attorney gave me, she had watched me and decided I was the one who understood that things are built, not given. I was 16 when she died. I was 16 when I sat in an attorney's office with my parents and heard that I had been left a one-bedroom apartment in the Hawthorne neighborhood of Portland, Oregon, in a building that was 40 years old and needed work. My mother said, "What is she supposed to do with that?" My father said, "The taxes alone will be a headache." My brother Tom, who was 20 and home from his first year of college and had come to the reading out of curiosity, said, "At least she got something, I guess." I said nothing. I looked at the address on the document. I thought about Meredith and her 30 years in hotels and the letters she had written about things being built rather than given. I thought, okay, I will build. The apartment was, my parents were not wrong, in need of work. I went to see it the first weekend after the reading, by myself, taking the bus because I did not yet drive and did not want to ask either of my parents to take me somewhere they had already dismissed. The property manager let me in, and I walked through the space with my phone out, taking photographs, making notes in a document I had started titled, "With the earnest seriousness of a 16-year-old who has read too many business books, property assessment." 1 bedroom, living area, kitchen that had not been updated since roughly 1994, bathroom with original fixtures, which I had learned from the internet could mean either charming or deteriorating depending on condition, and in this case, both. Hardwood floors under carpet that would need to be pulled up and assessed. A window in the bedroom that faced a courtyard and let in good light. The building had a tenant in the unit below who had been there for 11 years. The unit above was vacant. The property manager said Meredith had kept rents deliberately low, which meant the building was not optimized for income but was very well regarded in the neighborhood. He said this with the tone of someone conveying information rather than making a recommendation. I went home and I built a spreadsheet. I was 16. I had taken an elective in personal finance my sophomore year that my guidance counselor had steered me toward when I asked which classes were useful rather than required. I had read 3 books about real estate investment that I had found at the library after the attorney's office. I had done research on short-term rental platforms that was, in retrospect, reasonably sophisticated for a person who was not yet old enough to drive. I had also, and this is the part that mattered most, a summer job at a hardware store that had already taught me more about home repair than most people learn in a decade of owning property, because I had been the employee who actually paid attention when contractors came in and talked through projects with the staff. I made a plan. The plan required money I did not have, which is the place where most plans end, and where this one almost ended. I had savings. $3,000 I had accumulated across 2 years of birthday money, holiday money, and income from babysitting, and then the hardware store. All of it saved rather than spent because I had understood since early adolescence that money saved was a different kind of thing than money in your hands. $3,000 is not renovation money. $3,000 is the beginning. I applied for a summer job at a second location of the same hardware store chain so I could work double shifts on weekends. I picked up 2 babysitting families who needed evening coverage during the week. I told my parents I was saving for a car, which was partially true. I wanted a car eventually, and which was also the kind of explanation that produced approval rather than questions. I did not tell my parents what I was actually doing because I had understood from the day of the reading that my parents did not believe in what I was doing. They had not said this in those words, but "What is she supposed to do with that?" and the taxes alone will be a headache had been received by me as a complete statement of their expectations. They expected the apartment to be a minor nuisance. They expected me to eventually sell it for whatever small amount it would bring and consider myself mildly lucky for the windfall. I was not going to sell it. I was going to renovate it, furnish it, and list it for short-term rental. And I was going to do it myself. The summer between junior and senior year of high school, I renovated Meredith's apartment. Not alone, and I want to be honest about the labor. I had the hardware store network, which meant I knew contractors by first name, and several of them were willing to do weekend work at reduced rates in exchange for referrals and the satisfaction of working with someone who knew what she was asking for and why. A plumber named Daryl replaced the bathroom fixtures and regrouted the tile for $800 because I had sent him 3 jobs from customers who asked me for recommendations. A flooring contractor named June pulled up the carpet, refinished the hardwood underneath, and found it in excellent condition for $400 because I helped her source the materials at cost. An electrician named Roberto updated the outlet situation for $600 over 2 weekends because I had been honest with him about my budget and he respected the honesty. I painted everything myself. I refinished the kitchen cabinets myself, watching tutorial videos until I could do it without watching the tutorial. I replaced the cabinet hardware, the faucet, the light fixtures throughout, all of it myself, all of it with materials I had researched and sourced and carried on the bus when I could not borrow a truck. By August, I had spent approximately $4,800 and turned the apartment into a space that was clean and warm and photographed beautifully in the afternoon light from the courtyard window. I had a friend from school who was already doing amateur photography come and shoot it for $50 and a favor I would owe her. I listed it on Airbnb the first weekend of September. It was booked within 6 hours. The first year, the apartment generated $22,000 in rental income, net of platform fees and cleaning costs, which I managed myself by hiring a cleaning service on a per-booking schedule that I negotiated down to $45 per turnover by guaranteeing minimum bookings per month. $22,000. I was 17 years old and a senior in high school, and I was generating $22,000 per year from a property I had inherited and renovated with my own labor and savings. I told no one in my family, not because I was deliberately keeping a secret, or not only because of that, but because I had started to understand that what I was building required quiet to build correctly. Attention from my family at that stage would have been the wrong kind of attention. It would have been skepticism dressed as concern, advice that came from no experience, involvement that added friction without adding value. I had seen what happened to plans that entered my family's conversational orbit before they were complete. They became other people's opinions before they became real. I let it stay quiet. I opened a business checking account when I turned 18. I talked to the attorney who had handled Meredith's estate, a woman named Patricia Holloway who had recognized something in the 16-year-old who came to her office with a spreadsheet 3 months after the reading, and who had become, across the following years, something between a professional advisor and an unofficial mentor. Patricia helped me understand the tax implications, the entity structure, the correct way to hold real estate as a legal matter rather than a personal one. I listened to everything she said and implemented it carefully. I started college in Portland, which was a practical decision and also the right one. Being in the city where my asset was located meant I could manage it directly and keep costs low. I took courses in business and finance alongside my declared major, attending evening sections when the timing required it, carrying a full course load because I had calculated that I could and because I was not willing to sacrifice the degree for the business when both were possible. By the end of my freshman year, I had saved enough, between the rental income and the continued working, to have a conversation with a local commercial real estate broker about what was available. The Cascade Inn was not what I was looking for when I found it. I had been looking at small multi-unit residential properties, duplexes, maybe a small apartment building. Things I understood from the Portland apartment scaled up modestly. The Cascade Inn was a 12-room property on the east side that had been operating as a budget motel under previous ownership, had closed when that ownership ran into licensing issues, and had been sitting vacant for 2 years while a complicated estate sorted out its disposition. The condition was poor. The rooms had not been updated since at minimum 2005. The common areas were institutional and uninviting. The mechanical systems needed assessment. The parking lot needed repaving. The signage was sun-bleached and one panel was missing entirely. It was also in a neighborhood that was unmistakably in the early stages of becoming something different. New restaurant openings, a renovated arts venue 2 blocks north, a coffee roaster that had opened to lines out the door. I had been watching the neighborhood for 4 months as part of my research process because I had learned from Meredith's apartment that location was not just where something was, but what it was becoming. The asking price, factoring in the condition discount and the estate's desire to close quickly, was $240,000. I was 19 years old, in my sophomore year of college, with a renovated apartment generating income and savings and a business entity and an attorney and a broker and no one in my family who knew any of it. Patricia said, "This is bigger than the apartment." I said, "I know." She said, "You'll need financing. Your income history is real, but a lender will need to see it and understand it, and your age will be a factor in how they see it." I said, "Then we make sure they see the income history and understand it." It took 4 months and more conversations than I want to count. 2 lenders passed. The third, a local credit union whose commercial lending officer Patricia had a relationship with, looked at the documentation I had assembled. 2 years of rental income, tax returns, the renovation cost-benefit analysis, the neighborhood research I had compiled, the business entity structure, and made an offer. I closed on the Cascade Inn in the spring of my junior year. I was 20 years old. The renovation of the Cascade Inn was a different kind of project than the apartment. Not in kind, still paint, still fixtures, still floors, still the careful sourcing and project management I had learned to do, but in scale, which required learning new things about how scale changes management. I could not refinish 12 rooms of floors myself. I could oversee the contractor who did it and understand the work well enough to verify the quality and the billing. I could not furnish 12 rooms from the same sources I had used for one apartment bedroom. I could identify a commercial furniture supplier and negotiate volume pricing. Tom mentioned her at dinner that week. He said there was someone at the place he was staying who was interesting, a woman who worked in the kitchen, and he wanted to know if I thought it was weird to ask out someone at a hotel where you were staying. I said I thought the etiquette was manageable if both parties were interested and if he was planning to check out within a reasonable time frame. He said he was leaving in 2 weeks. I did not tell him I owned the hotel. I had not told him I owned the hotel during the booking process, and I did not tell him then, and I want to be honest about why. Not because I was planning a reveal, not because I was protecting some strategic secret, but because the explanation of how I owned a hotel would have opened the entire history. The apartment, the income, the years of quietly building. And that conversation was one I had been deferring with my family for almost 7 years. I was not ready to have it at a dinner where Tom wanted to talk about a woman named Emily. Tom and Emily dated for the remaining 2 weeks of his training and continued long distance when he returned to Seattle. A year later, he called me to say he was in love with her and was planning to propose. I said, "Tell me about her." He told me about her. Smart, opinionated, good with people in the engaged way that suggests genuine interest rather than performance. I asked how they had navigated the long distance, and he described it in the way of someone who has figured something out and is proud of how they figured it out. I said I was happy for him. He said, "She's moving to Seattle once we're engaged. She's been working at this boutique hotel in Portland, but she wants to be with me." I said, "What hotel?" He said, "The Cascade Inn. It's on the east side. You'd probably know it." I said, "I've heard of it." The engagement party was held at my parents' house in October, which was the logical venue because it was large enough and because my mother, who has strong opinions about the correct way to celebrate milestones, had offered it before Tom had finished telling her the news. I arrived an hour in, which was later than I had intended, but not as late as some guests. The house was full in the warm, busy way of family celebration events, my parents circulating. Tom's friends clustered near the kitchen, some of my aunts and uncles in the living room, Emily and a cluster of people I did not recognize who were likely her family or her friends. I had not met Emily in person before this event. She had been at the Cascade Inn during a period when I was rarely on site and Clara handled the staffing. I recognized her from the photograph Tom had shown me in the summer. She recognized me approximately 20 minutes into the party when Tom brought her over to introduce us. She looked at me with the particular expression of someone assessing a new person according to a pre-formed framework and finding the assessment easy. Tom said, This is my sister Alice Emily." Emily said, "Oh, Tom has mentioned you." She paused in the fraction of a second way that preceded what she said next. "He said you're still figuring things out." I said, "Something like that." She said, "What do you do?" I said, "Real estate, mostly." She said, "Oh, like a rental or something?" I said, "A few properties." She said, "That's sweet." She said it with the warmth of someone complimenting a child's drawing. Tom said, "You kind of, Haven't really landed yet, which is fine. Not everyone has a traditional path. Tom looked slightly uncomfortable. He said, Alice is actually pretty. Emily said, Can I be honest? I'm going to be honest because I think we'll be sisters and honesty matters. She glanced toward where my mother was setting up the photo area with a small backdrop and good lighting. If we're doing family photos later, I might need to stand next to Tom's mom rather than Alice, just because the visual balance. It reads better for photos when everyone is sort of at a similar level. Professionally, I mean. She smiled at me. It was a social smile. I hope that's not rude. The room around us had not heard this. It was a private conversation in the noise of a party. Tom had heard it, and his expression had gone from slightly uncomfortable to something more than that. I said, Of course, stand wherever you'd like. Emily said, You're sweet. She touched my arm briefly. I can tell you have a good heart. That matters more than, the other stuff. She moved away toward another cluster of guests. Tom said, Alice. I said, It's fine. He said, It's really not. I said, No, but tonight is your engagement party and we can talk later. Later was 3 days after the party, when Clara called me about a separate staffing matter and mentioned in the course of the conversation that Emily had given her notice. She was moving to Seattle, as Tom had said, as expected. Clara also mentioned, as a secondary item, that Emily's departure was coming at a convenient time because Marcus had raised concerns about Emily's behavior with the kitchen team in recent months, specifically a pattern of dismissiveness toward the 2 other assistants, one of whom had come to Clara directly rather than Marcus because Marcus was a man and the dismissiveness had been gendered in ways that made going to him feel complicated. I asked Clara to document what had been reported. I then called Emily directly. I said I was the owner of the Cascade Inn and that I had been reviewing her employment file before processing her final paperwork. I said there were documented concerns from her colleagues that needed to be addressed before I could provide the employment reference she had listed me, or rather the Cascade Inn, as a resource for. The silence on the phone was significant. I said, I also wanted to reach out personally because my brother Tom is important to me and I want us to have an honest foundation if you're going to be part of the family. Emily said, You own the Cascade Inn. I said, Yes. She said, Tom never said. I said, Tom didn't know. He's finding out today, along with the rest of my family. I paused. I want to be straightforward with you. What you said at the party about the photos, that was the kind of thing that doesn't land the way the person saying it intends, and I think you know that. I'm not calling you about that. I'm calling you about the concerns from your co-workers, which are a business matter and which are documented. She said, I'm leaving anyway. I said, I know. The documentation still exists regardless of your departure date. If you'd like to discuss what the reference I provide says, this is the conversation to have. The conversation that followed was the kind that happens when someone realizes the playing field is different than they thought it was. She was not cruel about it. She was honest in the way people are honest when honesty has become the most strategic option. She said she had not understood the situation. She said she knew how the party comment had sounded, and she was sorry. She said she hoped it would not affect her reference. I said the reference would reflect her work performance accurately, which, across most of her employment, had been adequate, and that the documented concerns would be noted but not foregrounded if she wanted to provide a different reference contact for future positions. She said thank you. She sounded like someone who had received information that had reorganized something significant. I told my family the same week. Not a performance, not a reveal constructed for effect. I called my parents on a Sunday afternoon and said I needed to tell them something I had been not telling them for several years. Then I told them. The apartment at 16, the renovation, the Airbnb income, the savings, the Cascade Inn, the third property I had acquired the previous spring. My mother was quiet for a long time. My father asked questions, specific financial questions, the questions of someone trying to understand the architecture of something they had not previously known existed. I answered them. I had the numbers. I had always had the numbers. Tom called me separately that evening. He said Emily had told him about the phone call and about the Cascade Inn, and that he had had his own conversation with her about what she had said at the party. He said, I'm sorry I didn't say something more when it happened. I heard it and I should have said something right then. I said, I know. He said, why didn't you ever tell us about any of it? I said, you said at least she got something, I guess, when I inherited the apartment. Mom asked what I was supposed to do with it. I understood what the expectations were. He was quiet. He said, I didn't know what you were capable of. I said, I know.
He said, "That's on us."
I said, a little. He laughed quietly. He said, "Are you going to make me come grovel in person?"
I said, "I'll settle for you buying dinner next time we're in the same city."
He said, done. My parents apologized properly the following weekend when I went to their house for a dinner. My mother had called a family dinner, which in our family's language means something has happened that requires being addressed in person. My father said he had not understood what the apartment meant when Meredith left it to her, and he was sorry he had not paid more attention. My mother said she had underestimated me, which was the more accurate statement, and which I could see cost her something to say, and which I received with the full weight it deserved. I said, I didn't tell you because I needed to build it without other people's expectations in the room. That was my choice. I'm not putting all of this on you. My father said, Meredith knew. I said, she knew something. She didn't know what I would do with it. My mother said, she left it to the right person. I said, yes, she did. Emily and Tom are still together and still planning a wedding. I have had dinner with Emily twice since the phone call and the party. She is outside the framework of someone assessing my position on a social hierarchy, genuinely good company. Sharp, funny in the dry way I appreciate, honest about herself in a way that takes some people years to develop. She said at the second dinner without preamble, I want to say again that what I said at the party was ugly. I had made a judgment about you based on nothing, and I let it come out in a way that was dismissive and unkind. I'm sorry. I said, I know. She said, can I ask you something? I said yes. She said, were you going to tell me you owned the hotel regardless of what I said at the party? I thought about it honestly. I said, probably not for a while longer. I had been waiting for the right moment with my whole family. You accelerated the timeline. She said, at least I was useful. I laughed. She laughed. It was the first time we had laughed together, and it felt like the beginning of something that might actually be real. I want to close with Meredith, because she is where I started, and she is where the whole thing starts. She left me a one-bedroom apartment in Portland and a letter that said she had decided I was the one who understood that things are built, not given. She could not have known what I would build. She knew something about what I was. She bet on it with the most tangible thing she had. I think about her often. I think about 30 years in hotel management, starting at a front desk in 1971. The specific accumulated knowledge of how hospitality works that she carried and that I have been, in some indirect way, inheriting for the past several years as I make the same mistakes and discoveries she must have made before me. I think about the letter and the fact that she wrote it to a 16-year-old and trusted that the 16-year-old would know what to do with it. She was right. I knew what to do with it. I am still figuring out the rest. The third property, which is a 9-room property in a neighborhood I have been watching for 2 years, is in renovation now. There will be more after that. I do not know exactly what more looks like. I know it is mine to figure out which is the way Meredith built things and which is the way I build things too. Things are built, not given. She taught me that. I am still building.